You've known Kakashi for years. He showed up late, reading that book, face half covered by a mask, and he absolutely destroyed his enemies. The guy was called the Copy Ninja, and everyone in that world seemed terrified of what he could do. And you looked at him and thought, holy shit, this guy is a complete badass. And honestly, you weren't wrong. But at 10 years old, you hadn't lived enough to see what was actually going on. Neither had I. Until one day, I came across an edit of a scene between him and Sasuke, where Sasuke tells Kakashi he could never understand his hatred, that only someone who had lost everything could know what he was feeling. And Kakashi just says, dry as a bone, "You're too late. I've already lost everything." And that's when I started to see what Kishimoto was actually saying. Something I've never heard anyone name directly. Something that lives in the details. Details that changed everything for me. And I'm going to show them to you, because this video, at its core, isn't about Kakashi. It's about you. About me. And the Kakashi you know, the Copy Ninja, had to have a father who matched that. Sakumo Hatake, the White Fang of the Leaf. Here we learn that the reputation was something of a family trait. Kakashi's father was also known throughout the ninja world for what he could do. He was respected, admired, and Kakashi loved him. Not something the story spells out directly, but then again, as I said, it's in the details, in the fragments of Kakashi's memory, in the way he remembers his father, a child who saw a hero in Sakumo's face, but with so much respect, so much discipline, that all the softness stayed buried behind the eyes. Until one day, everything changed. During a mission, something went wrong, and he had a choice: push forward with the objective or save his teammates. What would you do? He chose his teammates. He chose wrong, at least by the rules of the ninja world. What happened next is the part that hits you. You're watching it thinking, what a cruel village, what awful people. It seems like anime exaggeration. Except the only exaggeration is reality itself. The whole village turned their backs, including the very teammates he'd saved. They were afraid of being connected to his name. People he had shielded with his own life now looked away when he passed. He lost everything, his status, his respect, but not his reputation. That stayed, just not the version he'd built. And you grow up thinking this is just anime drama. Then you get older and you watch it happen in real life. Someone tells the truth at work about a problem everyone knew existed, and you see every person who agreed in private disappear the second that person becomes the target. Nobody does anything. If anything, they step back, afraid of what might happen to them. And you realize Kishimoto wasn't exaggerating at all. Sakumo fell apart slowly. Depression came. You never see it happening while it's happening. You only understand it once there's no way back. And Kakashi, 5, maybe 6 years old, watched his father disappear. He didn't understand. And this is the first detail most people never stop to name. Kakashi loved his father, genuinely, but he was a child, an obedient, gifted child. Imagine being raised in an environment where the code exists to be followed, and then the person you admire most breaks it. It looks like weakness, like failure. That conflict is too big for a child to process, but it's simple to resolve. And that's what Kakashi did, a cold silence that screamed. And Sakumo's loneliness kept building until it became unbearable, until he died. Kakashi couldn't grasp the weight of it yet, but he knew one thing. The last memory Sakumo carried of his own son was a look of disappointment. I hope you haven't been through anything quite like that, but I know most people have had at least one moment where they judged someone they loved, and that judgment became the last thing that person felt coming from them. Sometimes it's a fight that never got a clean ending. Sometimes it's someone you slowly drifted from, someone you never got the chance to sit down with and say, I had it wrong. We always think there's more time, another conversation, that we're right and we'll stay right. We forget that nothing is permanent, that there's no right or wrong, there's only who ends up carrying the weight of it. Kakashi was reminded of that at 5 years old, and he carried it, not as a declared wound, not as a scar he shows anyone, as silence. When you lose someone the way Kakashi lost his father, things change, especially how you see the world. And the conclusion Kakashi reached was this: depending on someone is a weakness. Unsettling when you say it out loud, but for him and for a lot of us, it makes perfect sense. In the ninja world, the rules exist to protect order, not people. And if you're always alone, perfection isn't a goal, it's survival. And there was one rule that confirmed everything he believed. A true shinobi has no emotions. Kakashi clung to that like oxygen. Even the jutsu he developed around this time, the Chidori, was an expression of it. Fast, brutal, devastating. He drove himself in a straight line at the target without hesitation. But the Chidori was still incomplete, because the speed of the attack blocked his own field of vision. He couldn't see what was coming from the side. He went all in one direction and went blind to everything else. A perfect metaphor for who he was. That mindset, combined with his natural talent, made him easily one of the strongest ninja of his generation. Anyone on his team had to keep up, because Kakashi was always a few steps ahead. But like every ninja, he had a team, and that team included Obito. Obito was Kakashi's exact opposite. He showed up late because he'd stopped to help someone along the way. He didn't have the same natural ability. He hesitated in training. He was emotional, impulsive. Kakashi read all of that as irresponsibility and immaturity, and he didn't bother hiding it. He couldn't stand Obito. Not with open hostility, more like that quiet contempt, the kind that comes with an edge of correction from someone convinced they need to fix what's wrong. And it wasn't long before Kakashi made Jonin and was formally above him. That dynamic came to a head on a mission, Kanabi Bridge. It was Kakashi's first mission as a Jonin. He was captain. The weight of it felt like confirmation of everything he'd built, everything he'd done alone. But a good leader leads. He doesn't just fight by himself, and that was his biggest flaw. Rin was captured by the enemy during the operation. What do you do? Do what his father did and abandon the mission? No. Kakashi said what the code said to say. The mission continues. You don't risk the objective for one member of the team. That's when Obito said something unlike anything he'd ever said, and unlike anything the world had ever shown Kakashi. The White Fang was a hero. Someone who breaks the rules is trash, but someone who abandons their teammates is worse than trash. And just like that, he ignored his commander, ignored the mission, and went to do what he believed was right, save Rin. Kakashi hesitated. In that moment, the code wasn't so clear. Nothing was black and white anymore, and he went after them. On the way to Rin, Obito got in trouble, and Kakashi showed up to save him. In the chaos, Kakashi lost his left eye, and Obito, watching his teammate go down, felt something the ninja code never authorized: desperation for someone else, strong enough to awaken his Sharingan right then and there. They pushed forward together. Inside the cave, they found Rin and the enemy. The fight was chaotic, tight, no room for mistakes. Kakashi found himself doing something he'd have called unthinkable, fighting to save his team instead of completing the mission, trying to prove he was the captain he should have been. And it still wasn't enough. In a moment of distraction, a massive boulder came down, straight toward Kakashi. Obito pushed him out of the way. The boulder landed on Obito, half his body crushed, pinned, no way out. Kakashi's first reaction was anger. Obito had ignored orders, disobeyed his captain, made a call that wasn't his to make, and now he was there, crushed. And then Kakashi understood. Obito hadn't disobeyed a leader who knew what he was doing. He'd disobeyed a selfish, trauma-driven ninja who had failed. For all his certainty that the code was enough, that emotion was weakness, Rin had been captured, Kakashi had failed, and Obito, whom he looked down on, was the only one who did the right thing, and now he was dying for it. Obito didn't die because he went back for Rin. He died because he saved the captain who failed, and Kakashi didn't deserve to be saved. With time running out, Obito made a request. The Sharingan he'd awakened during the mission should go to Kakashi, not as a consolation, as a recognition. Kakashi had been promoted to Jonin not long before. Everyone had congratulated him, except Obito. He'd said he wanted to give him something worthy of the achievement, something that actually meant something. So he gave him the only eye he had. Rin performed the surgery right there in the cave, with the ceiling threatening to give, the enemy possibly on his way back, Obito conscious enough to feel every second of it. And Kakashi had to stay still, receiving Obito's eye, while Obito died beside him. Before everything went dark, Obito made a last request, not about the Sharingan, not about the mission. Take care of Rin. Kakashi promised, and he walked out of that cave carrying Obito's eye, and a promise that still had to be kept. There's something strange about carrying that. Remember the Chidori, the jutsu that was incomplete? The Sharingan completes it. With Obito's eye, Kakashi could finally track opponents at full speed. The technique that represented all of his coldness only became whole when he received the vision of someone else. Obito literally gave Kakashi a new way of seeing, not just the power of the Sharingan, what it represents. Every time Kakashi used that eye, he was seeing the world through someone he spent years not understanding, someone he dismissed, someone who, in the end, died to save him, someone who never betrayed his father. The last thing Obito did was protect his teammate, and Kakashi would carry that with him, in memory and in body. There's something that's hard to admit, harder than saying, I was wrong about someone. It's admitting that the person you underestimated was the only one who showed up when it mattered, that while you were locked inside your certainties, they went and did it, that the code you wore as an identity didn't save you, and the weakness you looked down on was exactly what kept you alive. You owe your life to someone you thought was beneath you, and that person isn't here anymore for you to look in the eye and say, you were right, I was wrong, thank you. There's no moment like that. That conversation doesn't exist. All that's left is the weight of carrying it, and the knowledge that they saw you far more clearly than you saw them, that they believed in who you could be before you believed it yourself, and that they chose to die for that version of you. Maybe you've never been through anything exactly like that, but if you've ever had someone in your life who believed in you more than you deserved in that moment, someone who stayed when they should have left, who bet on you when there was no real reason to, you know what it's like to receive that. Now imagine never being able to tell them it was worth it. Kakashi carried that in his left eye for the rest of his life.
Because he had a promise, take care of Rin. And you need to understand what that promise actually meant. It wasn't just protect a teammate, it was more than that. Kakashi knew that Obito loved Rin, for real. The kind of love a 12-year-old carries in silence because they don't know how to put it into words, but everyone around them can see it, except her. Obito went back into that cave because of Rin. She was his teammate, but also because he couldn't accept leaving his love behind. So when he asked Kakashi to take care of her, he wasn't making a teammate request. He was handing over the most important thing he had. During the escape, Kakashi and Rin ran into more enemies. Cornered, knowing he couldn't break the promise, Kakashi tells Rin to run while he holds them off. She doesn't want to leave her teammate, so Kakashi is forced to make her, and he tells her the truth about Obito, about what he felt for her, the things Obito never had the courage to say, and now never would. Imagine receiving that in the middle of a war. The person you just watched die was carrying a love you can't return anymore. And imagine being Kakashi in that moment, delivering the last words of a friend who died to save him. After that, Rin runs. She gets help. Kakashi did everything he could to honor the promise. He protected Rin with his own life and treated it as his real mission, because in a way it was. It was the only thing he could still do for Obito. Eventually, Kakashi comes to on the battlefield. His sensei, Minato, the fourth Hokage, was there.
So was Rin. The danger had passed. Minato grieved what happened to Obito. Everyone did. And then time passed. And as if that wasn't enough, what happened next was one more tragedy. Rin was captured. The enemy sealed a tailed beast inside her, a living weapon, with the intent of using her against the leaf. She would return home, and the destruction would come with her, and she'd have no way to stop it. Kakashi goes to find her, to try to save her. Rin understood the whole situation and made a choice. She chose the village, to keep herself from being used as an instrument of destruction against everything she loved, and in the middle of the battle between Kakashi and the enemies, she throws herself into the chaos. Kakashi was using the Chidori, the same jutsu Obito had completed by giving him the Sharingan, and she stepped into the attack. Kakashi didn't have time to stop. He was using Obito's eye, and even then, he couldn't see what was coming. Rin died in Kakashi's arms. There's no word that describes what Kakashi felt in that moment. It was grief for a teammate, but it wasn't just that. It was the feeling of having blood on your hands for something you never wanted, of being the unwilling instrument of the death of the person you swore to protect, of failing the only promise that mattered, not through lack of effort, not through cowardice, not through walking away or giving up, through not being enough, even while trying, even while being there. And the deepest layer of all, Obito had sacrificed himself so Kakashi could keep that promise. It was the only thing Obito ever asked. Kakashi broke it, with his own hands, with the jutsu Obito himself had completed. This is the kind of thing that destroys you from the inside, because it's not a pain that passes, it's not a wound that heals, it's the deepest cut that can be made into a person's soul. After Rin, Kakashi's silence was absolute. What could he possibly say? First his father, then Obito, and now Rin. Each one took a different piece of him, and each loss had a layer that made it even more impossible to keep going. Not hard, impossible. With his father, what stayed was the guilt of judging too soon, and never being able to say he admired him in the end. With Obito, what stayed was the debt of being alive because of him. With Rin, what stayed was something that isn't only grief, it's a mix of shame and guilt. And there was a kind of guilt there that's different. Not the guilt of someone who gave up, not the guilt of someone who did something wrong. It's the guilt of someone who truly tried, who did everything within their power, and still failed. It's the guilt you feel when you experience real, undeniable failure. Something all of us avoid. Because whenever we supposedly fail, we comfort ourselves by saying we still have potential, that we didn't really try our hardest. But Kakashi knows he gave everything, and it still wasn't enough. And maybe you just don't want to admit that this is your reality too, because this guilt has a bitterness that cuts straight to the bone. You did what you could, and it doesn't matter. And there's a layer that goes even deeper. Kakashi failed himself, but he also failed Obito. When you fail a promise made to someone who's still alive, there's at least the possibility of going to them and saying, "I tried, I'm sorry, I couldn't." Obito was dead. There's no going to him, no receiving forgiveness. The account stays open, forever. If you've lost someone like that, through the simple brutality of how the world works, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what it's like to carry something that wasn't rationally your fault, and that weighs like it was. You know what it's like to wake up in the morning and not be able to talk to that person. His father, Obito, Rin. Kakashi lost everyone who knew who he was before all of this happened, who knew him by name, not by mask. Well, almost everyone. There was still one person left in his life, his sensei, Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage.
And then Minato died. Kishimoto had absolutely no mercy when it came to Kakashi's life. You already know how. Everyone does. What I want you to feel is what that was for Kakashi. It wasn't the first loss. It wasn't the shock of feeling your world collapse for the first time. This was the last person, the last thread. And when he was gone, there was no cry, no breakdown, just silence. The kind of silence that comes when you have any tears left for it, when you've gone so far that the pain starts to feel familiar, when losing someone stops being an event and becomes just another morning. His father, Obito, Rin, and Minato. Kakashi was 18, 19 years old, and there was no one left. And here is the question the title of this video has been asking from the beginning. How do you keep going after that? Not how you get over it, not how you heal, not how you move on, which is one of the emptiest phrases that exists. How do you wake up the next day, and the one after that, and the one after that? Kakashi's answer isn't pretty. It's not inspiring in the way we usually expect, but it's the most honest answer I've ever seen an anime character give. He built a system. The mask is how he moves through the world without falling apart. The book is how he survives the silence. The lateness is how he keeps the dead present. It's not weakness, it's not weirdness. It's the architecture of someone who lost everything and decided to show up anyway. Each of those things was a reaction to the pain, a response to a question no one should have to answer that early.
And this is the thing I've never heard anyone say directly about Kakashi. Keeping going isn't the same as being okay. You can be completely destroyed on the inside and still show up every day. I said at the beginning that this video wasn't about Kakashi, it was about you. And I didn't say that as a figure of speech. I just want you to know that carrying doesn't make you weak, that showing up every day without being okay isn't a lie, that the silence of someone who has lost a lot isn't emptiness. It's the weight of everything that stayed. Kakashi wasn't broken in a way that shows. He was broken in a way that works. And that there's something extraordinary about a person who goes through all of that and still shows up. Every day. Masked, book in hand, late, but there. Because they found a way to carry it and chose not to stop. That's what Kakashi does. That's what a lot of people you know do. Maybe it's what you do.